or it could be my skill issues.
I want everything to happen automatically, just like so that I have to work less.
If you turned your code like this, you had a pyramid scheme. It was wild.
Today, I'm joined by AnthonyGG. Now, one of the coolest things about having Anthony on the pod is his story is actually very similar to a lot of the learners that we have on boot.dev. He's self-taught. He got started coding through gaming. So, Anthony, why don't you just take a couple minutes and give us your backstory? How did you learn to code, and how did you start writing code professionally?
So basically, it all started when I was around the age of 15, 16. I was a hardcore gamer, and that's basically where the GG comes from. Like, a lot of people think it's from Golang God, or they call me the Greek God or whatever, but it's actually GG stands for good game, which is a very common term in the gaming scene. I was basically a hardcore Counter-Strike player, right? I was playing 24/7. And at a certain point of time, we wanted to make this clan website. And yeah, I just learned how to make a simple website. I was using Dreamweaver, which is pretty funny because there's still, I made a tweet about it this day, yesterday actually.
I saw your tweet today.
It still exists. I was thinking, does that thing actually exist? It still exists, right? So I was making this in Dreamweaver, just HTML style sheets is what they called back then. So yeah, I made a clan website. Other people saw that website. They say, hey man, we also want a clan website. So I started making clan websites for other clans. They paid us money, me and my buddy Victor, back in the day, 16-year-old, already making money. After that, Counter-Strike, it was a very small scene back then. There was not such thing as matchmaking. So we were basically doing, renting our own Linux server, and we were installing the Counter-Strike service on that server. So we could play on our own server, and we could multi-service. We could do a lot of cool stuff with that. Other people saw that, and they also want to have their own server. So we started virtualizing, making more servers, renting these servers out. And that's basically the next step where I went into this Linux stuff, command line applications, right? Moving through folders, installing stuff, debugging, suffering. And then as the last part was basically that because there was no matchmaking, right now you just click, you come home, drink a beer, you click one button, and you're playing with the team. Yeah. But back then you needed to basically search. It was wild, man. So we made this platform where clients could register. They could register their team. And we made this ranking system where people would play a match each week against each other. And by the end, like a season, like a soccer season. And by the end of the season, the team with the most points was the number one. Yeah. There's no trophy, but he gets the honor, right? So we made that. So I needed to learn PHP, needed to learn like the CGI scripts, how to register a user, yada, yada, yada. So LAMP stack, insert into a database, and that stuff, right? And that basically went, was until I was 18, because I was studying. I went to school, normal school, electromechanics, right, which is a technical degree. Yeah, my parents just put me on a technical degree and called it a day. But I was 18. Yeah. I didn't love. I was a gamer, man. I didn't want to go to school, so I needed to find a job. So I searched. The easiest job I could find was basically PHP, and I came into the Drupal and Magento landscape. So for the people that don't know what Drupal is, it's basically WordPress kind of a thing, right? The CMS system. I think it doesn't exist anymore. Not quite sure. And then you had Magento, which
I've seen it around, but it
doesn't exist.
It's not
I thought it was already. Yeah, they buried already and put it into fire. But Magento was this giant e-commerce platform, standalone e-commerce platform for big companies. Right? If you have a small shop, you would probably doing like a Shopify or something else, or I don't know, these other small things. But if you were a big company, like a big clothing line in Belgium, like the GBC, it's a big company, they use Magento, and I was working for a company that outsourced people to work in these companies, right? But I hated it so hard, man. It was so hard. XML, plugin systems, templates. Man, it was wild. So yeah, just did that for a couple of years and tried to do some startups, failed a lot, even went bankrupt at a certain point of time. Until I find this beautiful job at Bubble Post, Belgium company, Ghent, 3 co-founders. I was the first hire, needed to make a traffic management system, wrote it in PHP, realized that for real-time stuff, PHP was not a good fit, or it could be my skill issues. Saw Node. Node was just coming up. It was just this new shiny thing. Like JavaScript. We were writing a lot of JavaScript. And now you could write on the server. So you could do and front end and back end. It was amazing. But But again, back in the day, guys, async await didn't exist, right? So it was callback hell, callback and callback. Promises didn't exist, it was callback, callback. If you turned your code like this, you had a pyramid scheme, right? It was wild. So yeah, it was very wild. So yeah, again, you actually needed to install. It was like an npm module called, I think it called async. It was an npm package, and it helped you for your asynchronous code that you could actually write it async.waterfall, and you could have these. Yeah, it was wild.
Oh, okay.
But yeah.
So you kind of simulate the high level developer experience, but yeah,
exactly. It was a wild time. It was a wild time to be alive. But we realized that, man, this code is very nasty, very hard to maintain with all these callbacks. And of course, at that moment in time, Golang was there, this new shiny object. I saw this on a video, like a conference talk, I think, on YouTube, and I said, man, you need to understand, like, we were at Timmy's, PHP, JavaScript, we didn't have a lot of low-level experience, and then you had this language that was basically perfect to jump in, right? Like C++ was already way too wild for us back then, but Golang was amazing. Statically typed, compiled to binary, easy to read, easy to write, very simplistic, and I could convince my CTO to basically say, hey, I think Go was just in 1.0. I was speaking about
that's
2012,
insane.
2013, I think, was just 1.0. And I could convince my CTO, which as a normal CTO would always say, no, we're not going to do that. But he said, yes, let's do it, because it was backed by Google. And of course, I'm a good salesman, so I could basically sell a dead cat to him. So I sell them Go. But it turned out very well. They still, so BubblePost itself is already being sold, taken over by another Belgian big company. But the software that we are writing there, this the traffic management software. They made a new company from that, Dropon, and it still exists of today in Golang. So it was beautiful, isn't it?
That's amazing, and that code
that's
probably
the story,
still runs, man, because Go's so backwards.
Yeah, that's still exactly. That still runs, and of course, I did some other stuff, some in crypto and all Golang stuff. And then recently, like 3 years ago, I founded Lavenue, which still I sold a big portion of my shares, but I'm still CTO-ish there, and was written in Next.js because you always need to use the correct tool for the correct job. And so I wrote this for 2 years in Next.js, but recently we ported that all. There's a big video about that. We ported everything to Golang, Temple, and HTMX. Yeah.
Hell yeah, that's so cool. So no CS degree, Counter-Strike, making servers in not WordPress, but other PHP e-commerce ecosystems. And here you are writing Go. Very cool, man.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I always say that back in the day, like 20 years ago, it was so easy to learn programming because the toolset was very minor, right? You had PHP, you had the LAMP stack, you had MySQL, JavaScript, and some minor front-end stuff. But right now, it's so I feel so bad for these people coming from uni right now, because you have, man, you need to know everything, right? Kafka, this, that. What's going on? This framework, that framework, React, server-side components. Man, it's so wild. Git and all these other shenanigans, all these tools. It's wild, man. It's wild.
The landscape's massive, and trying to, especially as a new developer, I feel like once you've got 5 or 10 years of experience, it's kind of, you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, not every job's going to require you to do everything. You can kind of find a niche, but that's not obvious, especially when you're new, and it can be extremely intimidating.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. Well, let's talk about Go then. So you've been doing Go now for the last, 12 years. Holy cow. Since 2024 to 2012?
Yeah, I had a little bit of a break once I started Lavenue, basically 3 years ago. I think I took 2 years break. Well, a break in writing production Go, because I was writing TypeScript in Next.js. So,
that's unfortunate. Yeah. Okay, so 2 year break, but you've been writing a lot of Go for the last 12 years.
Yeah.
I saw a video that you did recently that you switched from Go migrate to Goose for your database migration tool.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about this because up until maybe 3 years ago, I was a gorm user, Go ORM.
Oh yeah, gorm, yeah.
Yeah, gorm. It's a lot of people use it. I feel like it's one of those things that like it gets the job done. It gets out of your way. It's a very simple tool, but like when you have to do complex things, it can really start to get hairy. Or even just when you want to handle anything apart from very basic migration. So let me give an example. Gorm has some functionality that it calls auto migrate.
Yeah.
Which basically the way it works is like you define a struct, you add some tags to it, and then you say, hey, Gorm, please auto migrate this struct. The struct equates to a table. So every field in the struct equates to a column in the database. And basically all it does is say, if there's any fields in the struct that don't exist in the table, I'll just go make those. Yeah. I'll just go make those fields. It doesn't do any deletions. Like it just creates stuff. And again, it can get you up and running quickly. But when you're doing complex migrations, it's a giant pain in the butt. I've never used Go Migrate, but I recently started using Goose, and I love it. Give me some of your impressions, like switching from Go Migrate to Goose.
Well, the only reason I was using Go Migrate is because it's the first solution I saw on the Google search rankings. It worked very well, but it's like a little bit of tedious to install. And somebody from my community said, hey, why aren't you using Goose? And I needed to make a new service a couple weeks ago. And I said, okay, cool. I'm going to do this with Goose. And I just installed this and everything just works. And for me, if something just makes sense, it makes sense. You know what I mean? It's amazing for now, right? I didn't do much complex things with it yet. So I cannot really have my final verdict, but I think it's good, right? But still, I asked this question on Twitter recently, and a lot of people have also other things like Atlas or something. I don't know. There are a lot of other tools people are using. So one guy actually used the default stuff from Postgres. He said you could basically use the default some default commands to migrate. I don't know. I need to look into that.
Oh,
tweet.
Really?
Yeah, I needed to check that. But it looked very.
Do you primarily work with
complex.
Postgres then?
Yeah. Recently, I've been using Postgres for everything.
Well.
Yeah, that thing handles everything.
I have very few reasons to switch. I feel like Postgres does a lot for me. So to give everyone a little bit of context, so we're talking about this command line tool called Goose. We use it, in fact, in our boot.dev courses. It's the way we teach students to do migrations. Nice. And it's a really simple tool. Basically, you install it. It's a command line application. You specify migrations as just SQL files in your repository. And they just like run in order. So like the first one might create a table. The second one might add a column. The third one might remove a column, right? And they go in order. And the idea is at any point in the development of your application, you can run all of your migrations in order and you'll end up with like a valid database schema, that valid schema that kind of corresponds to like the main branch, for example. Super cool tool, especially if you're using if you're used to using like raw SQL to do stuff. I have found that like I need a second tool, obviously. Like Goose just does migration. So we use sqlc to compile SQL queries to Go code. What do you use in tandem with Goose or Go Migrate to interact with a database?
That's a very good question. So I was using sqlc in the beginning.
Wait, how long ago is the beginning?
the beginning of the Golang port that we ported Next.js to some Go services. Yeah. And we use sqlc because I think that's the most idiomatic stuff. It's just typed queries, typed structures, and it's just amazing. The problem that we had is because we needed to compile these queries, and then for some reason, it brought us a lot of merge conflicts from time to time. It was really annoying.
Oh, interesting. Because the generated code, probably?
Yeah, exactly. And especially in the beginning. I think if the project is already stable, that would be nice because you're not going to do these conflicts. You're not going to have every file is not going to conflict. But especially in the beginning where we're porting everything over, we were coding like a madman, me and my boy Teddy. And we had conflicts all over the place. And we just said, no, that's impossible. We cannot work like this. So we switched to Bun, right? Like you have Gorm, which is the ORM, right? It does everything basically automatic. Then you have something like other tools that you need to, these query builders with SQL. And then you have Bun, which is basically, in my opinion, the best of both worlds.
Is this Bun like the JavaScript runtime Bun?
It's exactly written the same. Bun, pronounced the same. But it's the bun.
Okay.
You need
It's
to
an
look it up.
unfortunate naming conflict, but yeah.
Yeah. It's from Uptrace, I think. The company Uptrace, they made that. It's a very cool library, a very cool tool. It also has migration options, but I didn't check that out. But it works pretty well. We can write, because we need to do a lot of special queries, so we needed to have a way to simple fetch a user by ID, update a user by whatever. But we also need to do these complex queries to calculate churn, MRR. We actually all do that stuff in SQL. We don't use Go code for that. We just, with Postgres, you can do such amazing things like subqueries and all that shenanigans. Calculate everything with queries. So we needed to have this high level abstractions, but sometimes also these low level finesse. Of course, the problem is you don't have typed queries, right? If you need to call user ID or something or whatever, company, some kind of a name. And if you change that in your database, you're fucked, right? And that's basically what sqlc prevents, right? Because it compiles that stuff into your structures. Yeah. Very cool tool.
So if I'm understanding correctly, then Bun is more similar. Well, I should say Bun is kind of similar to Gorm in that like you don't get this super strong typing of the SQL that you're writing. You have to like kind of check it at runtime. Is that accurate? Okay.
Yeah, because let's say you have a table called user ID, right? And you make a query where you need to fetch the user by ID. So you're going to user ID. You're gonna write that string basically as a string, right? But if you change that in your database, you also need to change it in your code. But with I think with sqlc, you need to compile that stuff, and it will automatically change your structure into the correct, your query into the correct form. You know what I mean? So, and that you don't have with Bun. So you need to be very careful.
This bit me a couple times with Gorm, because like you said, I just like specify a table name as a string in my code, and I could like mistype it, and there's nothing in my tooling to tell me that I did it wrong unless I like run the application and get like a table not exists error. Whereas with sqlc, I like make the structs, or sorry, in sqlc, I make the query as a string in a SQL file. And then when I run like sqlc generate, it'll actually blow up because I have all this statically typed Go code that like doesn't match anymore.
Exactly, and you will get that in your editor, right? You get these linting errors, compile errors, basically as well, and you don't have that with Bun. So that's a little bit of a drawback. But hey, I mean, big companies are also built in Ruby on Rails, so I think it's going to be fine.
That's cool. I'll need to check out Bun at some point. sqlc has been really good to me, but I could definitely see. I mean, there's definitely still some complaints I have, and I could see an issue with like. The problem with code, one of the problems with code generation is exactly as you described. Like you're checking in generated code to Git. And so when you get conflicts, they can be more annoying to resolve. Or I should say maybe just that they happen more often.
Yeah.
Because there's not
especially in the beginning, right? Yeah. But for small services, like these small little services, I would actually use sqlc for sure. If you have a couple of handlers with a couple of tasks you need to do as a microservice or a service, doesn't really matter the scope of it, but these small projects, why not, right? I think sqlc is the way to go 100%.
So I have an anecdote to share. I mostly want to tell you the story to see if you've ever experienced anything similar, because it really caught us off guard. This was just like 2 weeks ago. So we use Goose for our migration tool at boot.dev, and we also run our Go microservices in Kubernetes. And I mean, I guess that doesn't matter too much, but the point is we have between 2 and 4 instances of our backend server running at any given point, and they all connect to the same database. This is a super common architecture for like backend services. And the way we are running Goose at the moment, and maybe this is just a skill issue on our part, like we're just not doing it the right way, but we have our application servers run migrations on startup. So new pod starts up in Kubernetes. Basically, before the server starts, it just runs its migrations. And of course, if all the migrations are already ran, then it just does nothing and starts up. But if there's like one that's missing, it'll run the migration.
Yeah.
We realized that when we deploy, it restarts all of our pods with like the new version of our application. If they all have a new migration, all 4 pods will run the migration at the same time. And 95% of the time, 98% of the time, I don't know, it's not an issue because like one will run first and then the other ones will just be like, oh, it's already there. but we found out that it's actually racy. And I had assumed that goose was written in such a way that it couldn't be a race condition. Like, one might like lock the migrations table, for example, but it's not written that way at all.
Oh.
It will try to run all the migrations. So we're looking at our migrations table in production, and it's like, oh yeah, this migration was ran 4 times successfully, which like doesn't make any sense because it's like a create table operation. You should only be able to run it once. I was just curious if you've ever run into any of these sorts of problems with migration tools.
No, because I think migrating is the most scariest thing I ever did. I always need to do, if I need to do migrations, it's like, I take this responsibility on my own. It's like, because it's so, I don't know, I get really anxious and nervous when I need to migrate. I also made a small little thing, a small little SaaS company, a small little itty bitty recently, and also need to do these migrations, and it always makes me anxious. So I always do it manually. I never do it automatically. Of course, at a certain point of time, maybe at your scaling, you need to do these things, like you said, like automatic. When a new pod starts, you cannot basically just go in manually and do the migrations. But at this scale, what I'm working at right now, I would do it manually because these issues are just the worst, man. Yeah. There's nothing like production databases this is so weird. If something happens, man, there are backups, but even then, if you have a backup from the previous day, you're gonna, if you lose 8 hours on data, it's a disaster. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely see that. Some people are nerds about like configuring their development environment. Like they love to endlessly configure, right? NeoVim configs, like get everything just the way they want it. I'm not that, but I am a huge like nerd about automating my workflow. So like I do a ton with CI/CD. I want everything to happen automatically, just like so that I have to work less. So
makes sense.
That's why I
but not the
I probably
migrations,
automate before I should. Yeah, I probably automate before I should. And to be clear, this actually didn't cause any like catastrophic issues. It's more just like why do we have 4 valid migrations in the database? Like that's a problem.
Yeah, I see that. Did you raise that? Did you raise this issue with the Goose team or something? Maybe they could. I don't know. Maybe it's.
I was doing some searching through their issues. I haven't like talked to them about it. I probably should raise an issue. It is very strange to me. I'm guessing Goose has been around for a while. I'm guessing like people have run into this, and
should be.
I mean, I could be wrong, but my guess is that the Goose team is like, no, there's like a specific reason we can't lock that table. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Seems weird to me because the other thing we like thought might be a solution was, okay, well, instead of doing auto migration when the pod starts up, we could run the migration in CI, or I should say not CI, but CD. So like we have a GitHub action that runs that actually like tells Kubernetes to deploy the new pods. We could just have that one like continuous deployment server migrate the database and then spin up the new pods, and that would like eliminate even possibilities of race conditions. That one makes me a little nervous though, because like what if the continuous deployment like migrates the database and then like fails to deploy to Kubernetes? Like now the database is on the next version, but the new pods aren't out. So I don't know.
Yeah, it's also something basically that I just remembered because you're talking about a different version is with Golang migrate. I always had these dirty states. A small error, boom, database in a dirty state. And then, man, I needed to do all these nasty commands to revert. And with Goose, it's just a little bit more easier. I'm not going to lie. Man, this dirty state error from Golang migrate is so,
yeah, I never actually used Golang migrate, but from what I've heard, like, yeah, Goose seems to be the recommendation. So I'm on it. Okay, I've got a question here written down because I was perusing your YouTube videos. So by the way, for everyone listening, like AnthonyGG has an amazing YouTube channel. You should definitely go check it out and subscribe. But there was, actually now I'm forgetting if this was actually a YouTube video or some other post that you made. But basically it's where you're talking about should HTTP handlers explicitly return an error. So if you could like just briefly tell everyone like what a Golang HTTP handler is, maybe its function signature, and then we can like address this question of like, should it return an error?
Golang HTTP handler is, I think it's a type. It's a typed function, which is the handler, the handler type, and the signature is basically just a simple function that takes in HTTP response writer and a pointer to an HTTP request, and that's it. Right? And basically, if you call, for example, HTTP handle, I don't know what it is. It's handle func
Handle func, yeah.
Yeah, get, you could basically, you need to post a function pointer basically into that thing, your handler into that stuff as an argument. The problem is that, of course, your handler, you need to do some serialization of your deserialization of your request. You need to handle your business logic, and then you basically need to you need to respond to the end user in some way. So that's all parts in your handler, which I tend to keep very small, but still you need to handle these errors, right? And it gets so tedious. And I thought back in the day, actually, when I was starting out with Golang, I had the same problem. I was writing these handlers because everything back then at BubblePost was all API, a lot of API with front. I don't even remember which front end we used back then, but hey, all API. So I needed to do a lot of handlers. And I was checking because Docker was already kind of booming. Well, it was in the beginning phase of Docker as well, and was very popular, was written in Go. So I checked the HTTP codes, how they handle their HTTP. And I remember it was yesterday, and I'm not quite sure if it's still today. So for the people that are watching or listening, you should check it out and let us know if it's still there. It's a type, just like the handler type in Golang, right? It's the type, the HTTP API func, which is a function that takes in HTTP response writer, pointer to a request, and returns an error. And the whole shebang, the whole API in Docker back then returned an error. And then they had this decorator function, how do you call it? The higher order function that basically wraps it. And it basically handles all the errors in a centralized way. And people, I'm gonna continue on that stuff, but people right now, because I recently today made a tweet about it, they do not understand that the error type in Golang, it's an interface. It's very it's
you can make your own errors.
Yeah, it's straightforward for us, but a lot of people don't know that the error is not a type. It's a type. It's an interface. So what they did is they made all these errors, these specialized errors, for anything that could happen in Docker API, and they had a big switch statement in that higher order function that wraps that HTTP API func, and they were just switching on the error type. And you can do that in Go, switching on the type, on the underlying type, and they respond the correct status code that needs to be and the message they want it to be based on the type they returned. And I thought, man, this is amazing. And since then, I basically use that, and I'm still convinced that that's the way to do this stuff in Golang. But still, I had this video posted, and still a lot of people are basically saying, no, man, a handler is basically being handled in a Go routine, and it cannot return errors and blah, blah, blah. And how would you do that? But hey, check out the Docker code, man. If they still do it.
I'm so mad I haven't thought of this. Like, so when I first saw the video and it said like it should return an error, I was like, well, it shouldn't return an error. That doesn't make sense for like the standard library. But now that you're describing it to me as like, okay, I made my own, or Docker made their own, right? And now I can handle my errors in a central place. That seems like a no-brainer to me, because I actually do something very similar. And again, this is part of why I feel so dumb for not making this wrapper function that you're talking about that returns an error explicitly. But like I have one called like auth user HTTP handler or whatever. And basically its function signature is like HTTP request response and a user. And the assumption is that like, well, I shouldn't say the assumption is, I have a wrapper function that like does the authentication check and then passes in a user to like the actual handler. So any handlers that are behind authentication, I don't have to like muddy up the handler with all of that. Like, okay, check the token, go to the database. So I love this idea of building your own little helper functions, almost like middleware, right? And centralizing some logic.
I have the same thing built recently where I need to do a lot with personas, with these AI personas, and a lot of handlers that basically needed to have this specific persona by ID. And all my handlers were fetch persona by ID, by ID, by ID. I said, man, I'm going to write a wrapper function that basically already fetches that. And then I inject basically that persona into response request persona. And then I just always had that thing and put it behind, like you said, like this decorator function, higher order function. I need to be very careful because people always try to how do you say that? Fact check my
the terminology.
my words.
Yeah,
terminology. I didn't went to school, guys. I'm so sorry. But the thing is that and that's maybe that's what they mean, right? They say, okay, the classic handler, HTTP handler, should not return an error, but if you write APIs, your own handler should return an error.
Yeah.
And that makes, because sometimes I can see some stuff where there is no error needs to be returned. For example, I don't know if you, actually, I think it always will be an error returned. I was thinking about proxy service and proxy handlers, but still you need to do an IO copy, which returns it. Everything returns an error in Golang, right? So
I can come up with like a couple exceptions, but like they're definitely exceptions, which is why I think it makes sense to like write your own handler that returns an error and like use it in 95% of cases.
Mm-hmm.
One exception I think might be like WebSockets. So you've got this handler that like you basically expect not to exit until like the connection is dropped.
Yeah.
And the handler itself
just
is like a for loop. Yeah.
Makes sense.
And it's just like a loop that runs forever or whatever. I mean, you could argue that you could still have that return an error. It just might be a little misleading because at least in my experience, when I'm doing WebSockets, I'm usually sending errors like over the WebSocket, more than once. It's like something went wrong. I was trying to process something. So I need to like send an error down, but I'm not like closing out the connection. But I think that's the exception. Like most of us are just out here building JSON APIs. So
exactly. I think for APIs, it's so amazing. And I basically recommend to everybody just to try it out. And it's going to make your handler so much cleaner. And especially if you treat the error interface, if you can do anything with that. It's so amazing. And I see a lot of less education about it. I see a lot of people making these tutorials, but abusing the error is something people are not doing. And I love to abuse the error. Right? So
Well,
cool
you'll
stuff.
be happy to know that we're abusing the error. I can give an example actually. So most of our HTTP handlers, kind of just return an error, and it's like a string-ish thing, right? Like you can kind of put it into like a JSON response object that just says like error and then like the message. But sometimes we have an error that we want to be structured so that the front end can like parse it and break it down into like a table or something. So for example, boot.dev's an educational like challenge-based website, and we have this lesson type called HTTP tests. And in this lesson type, the challenge is you're going to have several HTTP requests sent against your server as the student, the server that you wrote, and then we want to take those responses and see if they line up with all of our checks. So when an error happens, we don't just want to like give you a little string that says, you fucked up. We want to give like a full breakdown of like, okay, the first request succeeded and it passed the test, but the second one failed. And so we have made like a full struct that represents this, and it implements the error interface, which basically allows us in our code to like pipe it through the rest of our logic, just like any other error.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah, it is. It is. This error thing in Golang still is basically like a big debacle, like the if add is nil. But I don't know. It clicks for me, but hey, this is what it is.
Yeah, I've always really liked it. But it also, I might be a bit of a Timmy. You have this in one of your videos that I watched. It was like Timmys and Chads. Like I too come from a Timmy world of like Python and JavaScript and TypeScript, and then I came to Go and I was like, wow, I love if error does not equal nil because it forces me to think about the error. People coming from Rust look at it like, no, it doesn't force you to do anything. You don't have to check the error. It's like, okay, I get that I don't have to, but like in 95% of cases, I'm reminded to. And so I don't like literally forget, which to me is at least, 80% of the way there.
Yeah, Rust does his error handling pretty well, but I also think it's a little bit of a misconception because a lot of these, even in JavaScript or even in PHP, all this code that you see, it looks beautiful, but they basically do not handle anything, right? It's like in Golang you need to, but because it returns an error, you cannot just do an underscore. You know what I mean? It's like mucking the error is kind of nasty. But in Rust, you just do an unwrap, or they just not handling at all. Even in PHP or Node.js, you just write these calls: get user by ID, update the user, do authentication, store it back, and just beautifully, it looks, whoa, this is amazing code. But you're not handling the errors.
And the samples online, that's the worst part, is like the examples online ignore the errors. And so you get new developers just copy pasting, no error handling.
Exactly. But hey, like, should we have better error handling in Golang? I'm not quite sure. Maybe, but how? How are they going to do that? Like, it's the backwards compatibility, right? I think they really want to do that. But the problem is, man, you can basically take an application from 10 years ago and it still runs without any problems.
Right.
There's no, in Golang, because it's so backwards compatible, which is very important for the industry, very important for adaptability. Like these big companies, this compatibility is, man, they love that, right? So they cannot do that, because I think if they implement some kind of a better error mechanism, it's gonna break stuff, I think. And I think that's the reason why they're not doing it. Yeah,
I think they shouldn't. Like, realistically, my belief is like, if you want to make like big, changes to the language, which like error handling is so central to Go at this point, just make a new language, right? Like just like make a new project, and people can like port their projects if they want or not.
It's the same with generics, right? So when I was just back in the day, like you were also here at 2015, where there was no generics, and everybody was like,
"Yep,
Golang, we need generics," and I was basically hyped as well. And then suddenly, boom, we got generics, and I never used generics at all. The only time I use generics is for making this a kind of a map, like a concurrent map or something that I can have different types on, or something else. But I see some crazy stuff in generics. I swear to God, I see some crazy stuff that I think, man, nobody can read. I cannot even read this. I don't even think the guy can read his own code after a week. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what it takes, because I agree. When generics came out, I was like, okay, this is cool. Like, I looked at them. I saw the use cases, right? Basically, anytime you have like a special collection type, right? And it can hold like anything, or, something within like some constraints. And like generics are obviously super useful for code deduplication. But I had a coworker who was like, finally, generics. And all of a sudden, like half of his code had generics in it. And I was so confused. I was not that like his code was bad or wrong. It just felt contrived, like trying to make things polymorphic that didn't need to be
forced.
Because in my experience, like the backend web servers rarely need polymorphism at like the application level. Because it's like you're taking a struct from the wire and then you're putting it into a database, right?
Yeah.
You're like running a few logical checks on it and then putting it somewhere else. Whereas like, I don't know, in some other context, I could see where it would be like used much more often, maybe in like game development or something. I don't know.
Yeah, for the vectors, right? I did some game development as well from time to time, because I just love to do it. And vector stuff would be nice. That's nice because you can have the float vectors and the int vectors and yada yada.
Yeah.
So it's cool.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions that I'm super interested to hear your takes on. One is context package. So this can be a hot button issue. I'll just ask it generally first. Like, how often do you use the context package? And if you do, what do you use it for?
Right now, at this point of my Golang career, I use it a lot. When I started, I hated it. Right? When we started, context was not a thing. It was still something that was, there's some kind of a Golang X package, which is basically some stuff goes there before it's getting adopted. And
it's like the extended standard library.
Yeah, the extended library. And when people really love it and it makes sense, they're going to put it into the standard library. And I really hated context because we were Timmies. Everybody was a Timmy. We came from, Timmy is like, take this with a grain of salt, right? We came from JavaScript, we came from PHP, and suddenly there is something that is called the context, which basically needs to be placed as a first argument in a function for context cancellation and other stuff. And shared, you could also do the shared values between Go routines. But Golang is the first language, not the first, but the first language people really adopt. Well, maybe also not, but you can fire Go routines whenever you want. You just prefix Go, boom, the function is getting scheduled for concurrent handling. But we didn't have that in PHP. We didn't have it in Node. It was so we didn't have the concept of, hey, these Go routines, they can be dangerous because every kind of logic that you do there, you don't see them, it's gone, but they might be still running, right? If you do a fetch
Yeah.
from a third-party application or something, man, I hope for you this thing doesn't, whatever, your logic doesn't
Just
hang
hang for 10 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you have 10 million requests, right, you're going to have 10 million of these Go routines hanging, and your server is cooked, right? I didn't understand that. And I think a lot of newcomers to Go, they don't understand that yet. But at a certain point of time, you're going to make these applications, you're going to spin up these Go routines, your server is going to cook, everything is going to be on fire, and you're going to realize, hey, shit, it's this Go routine that basically has a big memory leak. And then you're going to basically embrace the context package. However, I need to say that I basically most of the time type context to do or context background. And for the specialist, they are the same, right? I have this video where in one of my streams, I was talking about what's the difference between context background and context to do. And they are just the same. They are exactly the same.
They're just the same? I actually didn't know that. I always use background when I don't have a specific
to do
context.
and background are basically the same. They are two different structs, empty structures. They are two. I looked that up. I'm going to ask that as an interview question just for the meme. I looked at it. It's basically
they're
two
technically
structures.
Different structs, but they're empty.
Yeah, they're empty. Just the name is different, and they all refer to this other type. I think it's I don't know, empty context or something, and it just do nothing. It does nothing. It just has a different string representation. I think it has.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So, but why do I use it for? Well, especially like you mentioned, like these context cancellations. For example, at Revenue, we need to onboard the user. I have a very good example. We need to onboard a user. A user can basically link his subscription manager, right? It can connect with Stripe, for example. And what we do if he connects with that, we basically fire up a Go routine that's going to fetch all the subscriptions from his manager. And we do that in a Go routine. But the problem is that, how long is it going to take? I don't know. And I always talk about these deterministic applications. And what I mean by that is you never know how long your Go routine is going to run. You never know how long your function is going to operate. And you can make it deterministic with a context timeout, right? With a context deadline, you can say 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So you always know that it's going to end faster, but the maximum amount it's going to take is 15 minutes, for example, right? So that's why we use that. And also you get this cancel. The context with cancel is one of my favorites. I use this all the time, where you basically can just do a manual cancel whenever needed. I really like that. I'm really starting to like the context package. Yes. And even in this Hollywood framework that I wrote, which is this actual model framework, and something that's very typical for actors is to poison them. And if you poison your actor, it's basically going to send a poison pill. But it's first going to handle all these other messages in the queue. And once it basically gets this poison pill, it's going to stop your actor. So, of course, for this library, I need to make sure that the user can... Basically, if you poison it, it's going to be an asynchronous operation. But I want the user to basically have the option to wait until his actor is being poisoned. So I have this wait group as a first argument, which makes no sense. And it could be nil. So the user have the possibility to place in its own wait group. And I check if the wait group is not nil, yada, yada. I'm going to basically call Tom on that wait group. And I was thinking recently, man, this is nasty code, right? It's so nasty. Nasty internally, because if the wait group is nil, and it's so nasty to read. And it's also for a user nasty to write, because he needs to make a wait group, and then he needs to place a pointer to that wait group, and then he needs to call wait on that
decide
wait group.
Decide if they care about a wait group,
Yeah. So, and I have this how do they call this ellipsis thing with this, the wait group with 3 dots, so they can also leave it out. It's non-Golang idiomatic, but it's idiomatic from a library's perspective. And I recently refactored that with context. So instead of making this wait group, they can place a context as a first argument, and they can choose to do a context to do if they don't care. But they can also choose to basically put a cancel, and they can wait, and I cancel it and all that stuff. It's muy bien.
Much better. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. Like,
yeah.
For cancellations and timeouts, I would much rather pass in a context than maybe pass in a wait group.
Maybe pass in a wait group. That's how the variable calls. Maybe wait group.
Maybe wait group.
But very important.
It feels like Rust, like maybe.
maybe wait
type.
Group. Yeah. But still very important. And I teach this a lot. I say this a lot to people in my community, or people that basically come into the company. I said, man, context is a very important topic on your roadmap, because in the industry, you're going to know it. You're going to use it 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And in a job interview, it's probably also going to be a question. So
very often. In my experience, a lot of Golang interviews cover various packages from the standard library. Context is a big one. I've seen a lot of, especially if you do a lot of work with like strings, then the strings package will come up a lot.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I've seen that a lot.
What are they asking then? Concat to strings?
Well, so yeah, that's a good question. So I'm specifically thinking of an interview that I had 4 years ago, I think. I worked in kind of like big data marketing analytics tools. As like my job title was backend engineer, but I was really closer to a data engineer. So we're ingesting like thousands of tweets and Reddit posts and Facebook posts like per second, and like doing analysis on them. And so we used a lot of standard library functions, things to like strip white space and split on words, count runes in strings, things like that. Might be a little like industry specific, but at least where I worked, we did a lot of string manipulation. I think we got one more good question, and then we could probably end on it, because this has been such a good conversation about Go. I think we can just focus on Go the whole time.
Yeah, why not?
Okay, so one question I have, and this is great for someone who's been working with Go for so long, is about the developer experience of working with Go on web applications. So I think most of us would agree. I mean, I think I assume you and I would both agree that the developer experience of using Go for like backend web services is like really good. Like that's where it shines. Yeah. It's so good at that.
Yeah.
Where I found it lacking is when you want to do anything like front end oriented with it. So a lot of people are using like Temple and HTMX now with Go, which I think is really cool. But there's two big things that I've run into. One is Go's baked in templating library does not have static type checking. So you can very easily like reference a struct field that doesn't exist. That's like my big pain point number one. Big pain point number two is hot module reloading. So when I'm working in Node.js, or I shouldn't say Node.js, when I'm working in like a React app or a Vue app, I get nice hot module reloading locally, which means my web app is running. I change like a line of CSS. I save the file, browser updates.
Boom.
Immediately. Yeah. With Go, I have to restart the server. Where are you at on these two issues?
Very good question. Very good question. So basically, that's the reason why we would still keep Next.js at Avenue, because Golang's templating is nice, but it's nice for these small little things. But for these real backend applications, it's just, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot, right? 100% of the time, because it's not statically typed. And I don't know why, but I didn't know about Temple until recently. Somebody on Twitter or somebody from the community came up with that, and I checked it, and I said, man, if this works like I think it works, this is amazing. And I tried it out, and it was amazing. And I thought, man, now I can basically just rewrite the whole shebang, get rid of this little Next.js stuff, and let's go to put everything in Go. And for the little JavaScript we have, because our marketplace is it's a wrapper around a database, right? It's not more than that. We don't do fancy stuff. You know what I mean? Of course, here and there we have some sprinkles of JavaScript. That's no problem. That's no problem at all. And for these buttons and whatever, we can use some little bit of JavaScript.
It's like a little on-click handler or something.
A little bit. Alpine. I'm using Alpine. It's so amazing. It's nasty sometimes, but it's amazing. If you're a beauty queen, you're not going to like it, but yeah. But the problem was, again, just like you, the development. I was always restarting my server, and I had this muscle memory to tap to the screen, tap back in, and restart the server. But at a certain point of time, you really miss the beauty of these Next.js Node applications where you color text blue 500 and boom, everything is nice and sweet. But I was talking with one of the maintainers of Temple, and he told me a little trick, which is not in the documentation, which is basically you need to use air, right? And I think I have this little live stream about it where I show people this. So you need to use air for your server reload, right? That works pretty fine. That's fast. That's all good. But you don't do your Temple there, right? There is a command in Temple, which is Temple watch. And temple watch with a proxy. I don't know what the command is. Guys need to look that up. It's even not in the documentation yet because it's kind of experimental, but it works very well. Temple, watch, proxy, yada, yada. And what they do is they use something like they proxy this week. I don't know what it is. Proxy this request. They use server-side events. And believe it or not, it hot reloads your application even as fast as in Next.js or Svelte or any other Node application. Like I have it on stream.
Really?
I have it live on stream. It works perfectly. So you need to have three things open, right? So you need to have your Air server running. You need to have your CSS watch running. And you need to have your Temple watch proxy thing running. So you need to have these three things open, which you need to do it once. When you wake up, you boot that stuff up and it's going to be fine.
Or make a script.
Once you have that open, it just works, right? You I don't know, font bold, boom. Font is bold. You make a div, whatever, justify, align items, whatever, boom. And it's instantly hot swaps this stuff. Of course, I think if you're maybe on a very slow computer, it could maybe has a little bit of delay, but a lot of people are using it right now, and it works amazing. So, hey, your problem is already solved, man.
Yeah, I need to do some more stuff with Air. The one thing I ran into with Air that seemed like a halfway solution, and maybe it's just like this is the nature of statically typed binaries, like we just can't solve this problem, which would be unfortunate, but is it like it will do the reload of the server just fine, right? Like watch your code, rebuild, rerun, whatever. But like still got to refresh my browser, which I know is like the nitpickiest, like first world problem, like, right? But I'm so used to like having this WebSocket connection in dev between like a node server and my browser and just having it update.
Yeah, it's if you work on these applications, especially if you do a lot of front end, which I needed to do as well, it's a must have. It's good for a little while, but it's gonna slow you down. But hey, they have it right now. Trust me, you need to look up the command for the Temple watch with this proxy stuff.
Okay.
And it will basically give you another port you need to go to instead. If you have it running on 5,000, for example, it's going to proxy that to, I don't know, I think it's 7,000, whatever. And you need to open that, and it's instantly auto refreshes your browser.
So you're not connected to the port that your server is running on. You're going through a proxy, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, that's exciting. I need to check that out.
Yeah, you need to do it. And why is it not even in the documentation? It's maybe they already updated it. I don't know because nobody knows about this. They just the guy on my Discord. He said, "Man, you need to do this." And what the hell? But very important is that in Golang, a lot of people use this FS embed. Right? They're going to embed their assets into this single binary.
Yeah.
It doesn't work with that. It cannot basically.
I embed so much shit in my binary.
Yeah, but that. Man, you need to watch more of my videos. There is a little trick where you could use Go build tags, and you can have two functions. You can have two files in your application, right? And you're going to call it static prod .go, and you're going to have, for example, static underscore dev, static underscore prod.go. And you could use build tags. And Golang, what it's going to do when you build your application, it's going to check if you're building for production, of your building for development. And it's going to pick the function that's in that file. And so for the development, what you're going to do is you're going to just use the normal file server, I would say, like, hey, just search for this file on my system, which then it works perfectly fine, right? CSS can be updated, can be swapped and all that stuff. But for production, you don't need your hot swapping. So for production, you use an FS embedded system and compile everything to a single binary and ship that over to your server. So that's already fixed. So hey, Golang actually, to be honest, it's a sleeper, man. It's like it's going to be big. Trust me. People are sleeping on the. It's very popular because every tool we're using is using Golang, like Docker, Kubernetes, Traffic, Caddy, all that stuff, everything basically. But in the next 10 years, I swear to God, if the community could be a little bit more open-minded, it could be perfect for web development. 100%. 100%.
It's grown so much in the last year, and that's why I'm so excited to have you on the pod and talk even more about it. Because I think the only thing that lacks to make it better is more people trying to make it better. Like the more people we have building stuff in Go, the more people we're going to have making stuff like Air and Temple, right? Because it doesn't all just come down from on high from Google, right? Like we need the community making amazing like libraries that make the local development experience that much better. I think Go has its roots in like use the standard library for everything. And like, I think that's a good route, but like you still need community building, especially like tooling that makes the experience better. Huge fan of all that stuff.
I say this a lot, and I think Golang could be much bigger if the community itself, like I'm Golang, you know what I mean? I breathe Golang every day. But a lot of people are this stubborn, like, okay, we need to use this standard library and you need to do everything yourself. And I get it. But if these people were a little bit more open-minded, just like Python, in Python you could do whatever you want. And Python, there's the land of the free. Everybody's happy. Nobody is complaining. In JavaScript, it's the same thing. You could build a new framework and everybody's going to try it out. Everybody's cheating, yay, and you get funding and all that stuff. But in Golang, if you even try to make some kind of a web framework that's a little bit more magical, I would say, they're gonna bash you on Reddit and they're basically gonna send death threats to your house. And that's the problem, because if they do, but if they didn't do that,
that's why I don't go to Reddit. Just don't go to Reddit.
I'm actually thought about so many things that I really want to build for the Go community that is really amazing, because we are using that at our company. But these little magical stuff for the framework, but I think people are gonna hate it. And that's the reason why I don't spend time on it, which is unfortunate, right? So community, listen. You need to be a little bit more open-minded, and we can make Golang the best stuff ever. Trust me. Hey,
I love it. Thanks so much for coming on. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I want to see a lot more tooling, even if it's bad. Like, doesn't mean I'll use it, but like, I want to see it. I want to see people making stuff. It's also so easy to share stuff in the Go community. Like, we have such good, like, now that we have Go modules, like, sharing code, you don't even have to like publish it to a third party like NPM or anything. You just put it on GitHub and people can use it if they want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, cool stuff, man. So cool. I really like it.
Thanks for coming on, Anthony.
Hey, man, happy to be here.
Yeah, can you plug all your channels and places where people want to tell people where they can go find you online?
Yeah, so basically I stream a couple times a week on YouTube and Twitch. What is my handle? It's a good question. It's AnthonyGG_ because everything was already taken. But maybe you're going to post it in a link or something, Lean, I'm not quite sure. So you can find me on Twitter.
Then an underscore, right?
Yeah, something like that, I think, yeah. Or on Twitch, you can find me as well. You can find me on Twitter. Basically, I think if you Google me, you're going to find me. You're going to find me 100%. Man. It's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, you've got a big enough following that if you just type in or just AnthonyGG,
you're gonna see some weird pictures. But hey, it's all for the YouTube. I need to do that. I don't want to be, but YouTube made me do it. Right? I need to do that. Otherwise, I don't get views. Right?
You're the guy with the keyboard gun, right?
Yeah.
That's a keyboard, right?
That's a keyboard. Yeah. That was one of my first pictures I took for my thing. I like it. I don't know, and I just keep it like that. It's I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's iconic at this point. You just got to keep it. Cool, man. Well, we'll talk to you later. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Lane. See ya.